Adel El Gammal, Secretary General of EPIA. We're here at a Fondation EurActiv event to discuss solar power, renewables generally, but solar power more specifically. There's been some interesting developments over the last few weeks, most notably the National Renewable Energy Action Plans, which have been submitted. What are your thoughts on the current situation?
Well, thank you for the question. First of all, we're starting to have a look at it. As you know, not all the final versions of the action plans have been submitted yet. But what we can see is that maybe apart from two exceptions, we see really, from our perspective, a lack of ambition in terms of the penetration of PV as an electricity generating sources by 2020. In fact, if we look at the global market outlook, as you know, EPIA is releasing every year a global market outlook. We've released the last one in May this year. We see that the forecast for the coming years, in fact, show a much more aggressive deployment of PV and penetration of PV than what the Renewable Action Plan would suggest. So in many countries, we expect that the actual market will develop much faster than what is in the official plan. So we believe that it is partly due to, let's say, probably a lack of awareness from some governments on the speed to which the PV electricity is becoming competitive, which is extremely fast. In fact, we expect to reach the so-called grid parity, so the competitiveness, at least on the residential segment, probably next year or in 2012 in some regions of Europe already. So PV is poised to become massively competitive within the current decade. Of course, there are some exceptions, and if we look at Germany, of course, it's not a surprise. Their National Action Plan, we believe, is quite realistic. In fact, it really is very much in line with the EPIA accelerated scenario. In fact, we have done a major study which is called Set for 2020, where we analyzed the potential of PV as an electricity source by 2020 in all countries of Europe. And our accelerated scenario yields shows that PV could, I would say, relatively easily represent 6% of the electricity demand by 2020. And of course, this means different penetration in different countries, depending on the irradiation, the significance of the industry. And Germany is quite aligned with our intermediate scenario, which is the accelerated scenario. Many countries, including countries which have much better irradiation conditions, are much below this scenario and much below also the short-term market outlook that we're seeing. So I would say, generally speaking, a lack of ambition, which probably comes from a lack of awareness of the real competitive nature of PV in the very short term.
Now, you talk about competitiveness. That's obviously relating to price and the price per user, the price per kilowatt, for example. The issue I think that most of us are probably a little confused with, those of us that aren't in the industry, is whether the competitiveness increasing is technological or it's because there are other energy sources becoming more expensive. What are your thoughts?
That's a very good question. It will be very difficult to answer in a short, in few minutes on the second half of the question, which is the impact of the other energy sources on the price of electricity. But if I make abstraction of this part, what we can do with a very high level of certainty is look how the price of the PV electricity will evolve over time compared to what we believe should be the evolution of the current mix of electricity, which is mainly based on, well, I would say nuclear for some countries, but mainly based on fossil fuel, conventional fossil power plants. If we do that, we see that inevitably, of course, the electricity prices will go up under, I would say, the pressure of increasing price for fossil fuels, whatever they are. And we see that PV is going really extremely aggressively down. And that is only because the market is deploying very fast. In fact, if you look at PV, you could compare to a certain extent to other technologies such as the flat screen displays, for instance. So there is a very high technological content, and if your market deploys quickly, you go very quickly down the experience curve. And this is what we're seeing with PV. In fact, since 30 years that we can look at the evolution of prices, the prices has consistently gone down by 22% each time you double the cumulative production or the installed capacity. Now that the markets are deploying extremely fast, and we're talking, for instance, in 2009 we had a market of more than 7 gigawatt peak, which is enormous, you see the prices declining incredibly rapidly. And that's the reason why we believe PV will become competitive in some region of Europe, probably in the coming 2 years, and then quite quickly it will expand to the other sunny region and then northwards. And we believe, by the way, according to analysis, that by 2020 PV will be massively competitive. I will not cite the numbers, but massively competitive on all three segments: the residential, where you compare to the electricity, the price that you pay the electricity from the grid, but also on the commercial and industrial, where you compare the price of the PV electricity with the generation cost of the electricity.
Okay, very interesting. Now, there seems to be another area of the solar debate right now which is very important, and that's projects like Desert Tech. The idea of importing solar energy from North Africa or wherever through Spain and Italy, for example. What are your thoughts on this? What impact will it have?
A very interesting question, and also a lot of elements that need to be considered in the answer. I would say, first of all, I mean, we are talking very closely with Desert Tech, and by the way, they will probably soon become a member of our association, EPIA. So we believe that there's a lot of interesting elements in Desert Tech, and I really applaud this initiative. Now, it raises a number of questions. The first one is that, I mean, it's a little bit like we're not solving really the problem of security of supply, because basically you're replacing the fossil fuel by the sun, and you're tapping the sun from a very local place. So again, you're totally dependent from your installations in the desert. So it doesn't solve at all the security of supply and the geostrategical implications of that. Now, on the other hand, I believe much more in the future where the power will be distributed, and that is what I believe is extremely interesting. It's a key fundamental of the PV, is that it's a distributed energy source. And I believe that the future will be much more a future where the consumers will be at the same time consumer and producers, and you will have intelligent networks with multi-directional flows, just balancing the demand and the supply at every moment. But we need to move away from, I believe, from this very, I would say, hierarchical and centralized view of where we generate as much as we need and then we consume anywhere at any moment. I think it will be much more, the future will be much more intelligent. Now, another consideration is also that I think Desert Tech Foundation, Desert Tech Initiative was often seen as a way to import electricity in Europe, where Europe would probably have difficulties in reaching really high penetration of renewable energies. If you have a detailed look into the energy consumption worldwide, you see that in fact countries of the Sunbelt region will first of all have quite important electricity demand, but that the prospect in terms of growth is absolutely massive. We've made an analysis showing that in 25 of the key countries in the Sunbelt region, the growth between now and 2012 and 2020 will be more than what the total consumption of electricity will be in Europe by 2020. So there's a massive growth there, and I think what we need to think about is that we need to produce probably locally to serve these local markets rather than to serve our energy markets.
Adel El Gammal, thank you very much for your time today.